My Uncle Arthur left his whole fortune to whoever solved his riddle, so our family got savage. Uncle Arthur was the black sheep, made millions in tech before crypto was even a thing. We scraped by, stuck in dead-end jobs maxing out cards. He lived in a huge mansion with 7 bedrooms, a wine cellar worth more than most homes, and a garage full of cars costing more than my yearly pay. When he died suddenly at 52 from a heart attack, we all thought his money would go to some unknown charity, his last jab at the family who treated him like an outcast for decades. Instead, his lawyer called us to the office and read the weirdest will any of us had ever heard. To my greedy relatives who only called for money or to complain, I'm giving you one chance to prove you're worth more than your failures combined. Solve my riddle. Claim everything I built. Fail, and it all burns in a big bonfire while you watch from the street. The riddle was printed on fancy letterhead, sealed in separate envelopes for each family member. Where shadows dance but cast no light, silence screams all night. Where memory lives but time stands still, find the key to my last will. At first, we actually worked together like a real family. Aunt Brenda suggested his old photography darkroom where he'd spend hours developing pictures. Cousin Leo thought it was his study, where he'd sit in total darkness typing for hours. Aunt Carol was sure it meant the basement wine cellar, where he kept bottles worth thousands each. My brother Liam thought it meant the attic, where old furniture gathered dust under white sheets. For 3 weeks, we tore through every inch of his mansion like wild animals. We moved untouched furniture, checked behind expensive paintings for hidden safes, pulled up rugs, and pried floorboards until our fingers bled. We searched crawl spaces, checked every library book for hollow spots, and even drained his pool for underwater hiding places. Nothing, not a single clue. That's when family bonds started snapping like overstretched rubber bands. Brenda hired a private investigator, who charged $800 a day. Leo bribed the longtime housekeeper with a 10 tip for info on Arthur's daily habits and secret spots. Aunt Carol started showing up at 5 a.m. to search rooms before anyone else, saying she needed quiet to think. Liam installed hidden cameras to spy on us, watching our moves like we were criminals. The real ugliness began when Brenda found something she wasn't supposed to. She was searching Arthur's master bedroom for the 100th time when she found a loose floorboard hidden under his huge antique bed. Under it was a metal lockbox with old photos and what looked like a second riddle in Arthur's distinct handwriting. But instead of calling us right away like we agreed, she slipped it into her designer purse and acted like she'd found nothing. Unfortunately for Brenda, Liam's surveillance cameras caught everything in perfect high definition. The next morning, he confronted her in front of the whole family gathered in Arthur's kitchen. Brenda denied stealing anything until Liam played the footage on his laptop. We watched her face go from confident to guilty to desperate in 30 seconds. "Give it back now," Aunt Carol demanded, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I found it fair and square," Brenda shot back. "Possession is 9/10 of the law." That's when Leo lost control, grabbed her $1,000 purse and dumped everything onto the marble kitchen floor. The metal box crashed open like breaking bones, scattering photos and papers everywhere. There were old Polaroids of places I didn't know, a tarnished key that looked important, and a handwritten note that turned my blood to ice. "Only one of you actually deserves this fortune. The rest of you deserve what's coming." The note wasn't signed, but I recognized Arthur's handwriting instantly. The same neat script we'd seen on birthday cards that always came with crisp 100 bills. His way of buying our temporary affection without actually building real relationships with us. The scattered photos showed places from our shared childhood I hadn't thought about in years. The old family lake house where we'd spent summers before Grandpa died and left it to rot. Arthur's first dingy apartment above the pizza shop, where he taught himself coding. The sketchy carnival where he worked summers in high school, running the tilt-a-whirl for drunk teens, saving every penny for college. But one photo made Brenda gasp so loudly that we all turned to stare at her. It showed the abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, where Grandpa took us kids to play elaborate hide-and-seek. "He wouldn't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Wouldn't what?" Liam demanded, grabbing the photo from her trembling hands. Brenda looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Grandpa used to tell us horror stories in that warehouse during thunderstorms." Arthur was terrified of the place after what happened there. He swore on her mother's grave he'd never set foot in that building again. Leo picked up the tarnished key from the floor, turning it in his calloused hands, examining the scratches. "This isn't for any safety deposit box I've ever seen. Look at these wear marks. This key's been used recently and often." My GPS said the warehouse was exactly 43 minutes outside town, on 15 acres of worthless swampland our family had owned for 3 generations. We all crammed into Liam's oversized SUV like we were kids again, but the tension was so thick I could barely breathe. No one spoke during the drive except to give directions. But I saw Aunt Carol constantly checking her phone, probably texting her latest boyfriend Mike about the inheritance and what it meant for their wedding. When we finally arrived, the warehouse looked just like I remembered from childhood: rusted orange-brown metal siding, broken windows, and that distinct smell of decay and stagnant water clinging to everything. The only difference was the heavy-duty padlock on the front door, which looked expensive and new. Leo's key fit the lock perfectly, turning with a satisfying click that echoed across the empty lot. Inside, our flashlights showed something that should have been impossible. The warehouse had been fully renovated. The concrete floors were spotless, painted a clean white. The walls were insulated and covered with new drywall. Pro lighting fixtures hung from the exposed ceiling beams. And right in the center of the huge space sat an antique wooden table with 5 chairs in a perfect circle. On each chair sat a manila envelope with our names in Arthur's careful handwriting. "This is crazy," Liam muttered under his breath, but he was already walking toward his designated chair like he was hypnotized. My envelope had another riddle, but this one felt different, more personal and menacing. "Before you stands your final test. One truth will put your greed to rest. Choose wisely what you value most, or join me as a warning ghost." Beneath the riddle was a typed confession that made my stomach churn, and my hands shook so violently I could barely hold the paper. "When we were kids, about 15 years ago, Arthur was watching us play hide and seek in this warehouse when a rotted floor section suddenly collapsed. Leo, only 8 then, fell through the hole and landed hard on rusted machinery in the basement. His leg was broken so badly that jagged bone pierced his skin and blood pooled around him fast. The rest of us kids panicked and ran screaming for the adults. But Arthur, who was 13 and bigger than most teens, stayed behind and climbed down into that dark basement. He used his favorite shirt to make a tourniquet, applying pressure and talking calmly to Leo to keep him conscious until paramedics arrived 20 minutes later. The ER doctor said Leo would have bled to death without immediate help, but that's not the story our family had told for the past 15 years. Brenda, 14 then, already showing signs of the jealousy and manipulation that had defined her, had convinced our parents and everyone else that Arthur actually caused the accident. She claimed he dared Leo to jump across the weak floor section, egging him on and calling him a coward when he hesitated. She'd been mad that summer because Arthur always got the most attention from adults. He was smart, funny, and charming, making everyone gravitate toward him at family gatherings. Brenda had always been average at everything. Average grades, average looks, average personality. She couldn't stand being overshadowed by her younger cousin. So, she lied, crafting a detailed story about Arthur's reckless behavior and coaching the younger kids what to say when adults asked questions. Our parents believed her because Arthur already had a reputation as the family troublemaker, not because he was actually bad, but because he questioned authority and refused to pretend everything was perfect when it wasn't. He'd spent the next 15 years treated like a dangerous criminal for saving Leo's life. I looked around the table at my family, watching their faces as they read their versions of the truth. Leo stared at his envelope with growing horror, his mouth open as memories from that day surfaced. Aunt Carol had gone completely pale, gripping her chair so tightly her knuckles were white. Liam looked confused and overwhelmed. He'd been too young to remember the incident clearly, but old enough to absorb the family story about Arthur being dangerous. Brenda was crying silently, mascara streaming down her cheeks in black rivers. "I was just a kid," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I didn't get what it'd mean. I didn't know it'd follow him forever." "You destroyed his relationship with our parents," Leo said quietly, his voice filled with pain. "I'd never heard." He tried to tell them the truth, begged them to listen, but they'd already decided he was lying. They chose to believe you instead of investigating what happened. That's when I noticed the cameras. 4 pro-grade security cameras in each corner, their small red recording lights blinking steadily in the shadows. We were being filmed, and had been since we walked through the door. A voice suddenly echoed from hidden speakers mounted throughout the building. Arthur's voice, but the recording was recent, probably made just days before his death. "If you're hearing this, you've solved my riddle, and learned the truth about what happened in this warehouse 15 years ago. Congrats on finally deciding to face reality. You've also just confessed your crimes on camera in front of multiple witnesses." Brenda looked up at the nearest camera with tear-filled eyes, her careful makeup now ruined. "Arthur, please, I'm sorry. I was young, stupid, and jealous. But I never meant." "Brenda," the recording continued, and I could hear the cold fury in my uncle's voice, even through the speakers. "You stole 15 years of family relationships from me with your lie. You cost me my parents' trust, my siblings' love, and any chance of a normal relationship with the people who should have mattered most. That betrayal is worth exactly 15 million. Multiple screens on the walls suddenly lit up, showing legal documents and Arthur's distinct filing system. Brenda's name appeared as the sole beneficiary of his primary estate, but small print conditions made her face go even wider. The money comes with strings attached. Dear cousin, you have 1 year to publicly confess your lie to everyone you told it to, starting with our parents' graves. You'll establish a foundation for falsely accused children and spend the rest of your life trying to undo the damage you caused. Fail any of these, and the money goes to charity while your confession video gets uploaded to every social media platform. Liam jumped up so violently his chair toppled backward and crashed to the floor. This is complete, Brenda lied. Not the rest of us. Why should we be punished for something she did? But you never questioned it, did you? The recording replied, as if Arthur had anticipated this and prepared a response. 17 years passed, and none of you bothered to ask Leo what he actually remembered from that day. You just accepted your brother was a monster because it was easier than admitting you might have been wrong. Leo's envelope contained entirely different documents. A trust fund worth 2 million, but also a letter that made him break down, sobbing. Leo. Arthur's voice became softer, filled with the warmth I remembered from our childhood. I'm sorry I never had the courage to tell you the truth while I was alive. You deserve to know someone fought for you that day. You deserve to know you were worth saving, and I never regretted staying to help you. I hope this money can buy you some of the therapy our family should have provided years ago. Aunt Carol's envelope was almost empty, except for a single devastating sentence on expensive letterhead. A mother who doesn't defend all her kids equally doesn't deserve wealth or forgiveness. Liam's envelope had a 50,000 check and a note that was both generous and brutal. You were 5 when this happened, so you're not responsible for the lie. But you're 22 now, old enough to think for yourself instead of blindly accepting family stories. This money's for college. Learn to question everything, especially stories that make one person a hero and another a villain. My envelope held the biggest shock of all. My dear niece, Arthur's voice continued from the speakers. You never believed Brenda's lie, did you? Not completely. He was right, and the accuracy of his observation made my skin crawl. I'd been 7 that day, but old enough to remember Arthur's bloody shirt and how gentle he was with Leo while we waited for the ambulance. I'd also been old enough to notice the inconsistencies in Brenda's story when she told it to the adults. I watched you struggle with that secret for years during family gatherings. I saw how it ate at you, especially during holiday dinners when someone would inevitably bring up the warehouse incident and paint me as the villain. You tried to tell your mother the truth once when you were 12, but she shushed you and told you not to contradict Brenda. My envelope contained legal documents, making me the executive of a separate trust fund. 3 million specifically for truth-tellers who find their courage too late, but still choose to do the right thing. The cameras recording this will automatically upload the footage to every family member's social media accounts in 1 hour, Arthur's voice announced with mechanical precision. The video will be tagged with everyone's real names and employers. Unless someone takes full responsibility for what really happened, your confessions will become public knowledge. Brenda looked around the table desperately, her eyes wild with panic. I'll tell everyone the truth. I'll post on Facebook. I'll call everyone we know. I'll fix this somehow. 17 years too late, Leo said quietly, but there was something like forgiveness in his voice. That's when Aunt Carol surprised us all by doing something I'd never seen her do. She took responsibility for her own failures. No, she said, standing up slowly and walking to the room's center. She positioned herself in front of the largest camera and looked straight into the lens with more dignity than I'd ever seen her possess. My name is Carol Miller, and I failed my son in the worst way. When Brenda told us Arthur caused Leo's accident, I should have investigated further. I should have asked more questions. I should have listened to Arthur's side with an open mind instead of assuming he was lying. Her voice broke, but she continued. Instead, I chose the easy story. I chose to believe one son was a hero who tried to help, and the other a dangerous troublemaker who couldn't be trusted. I chose convenience over truth, and Arthur paid the price for my failure as a mother for the rest of his short life. The recording stopped abruptly. The camera shut off with audible clicks. For several minutes, the warehouse was silent, except for Brenda's muffled sobbing and the distant hum of highway traffic. Then Liam started laughing. Not a humorous sound, but the bitter, hollow laughter that comes when someone realizes their whole life's built on lies and false assumptions. So, what happens now? He asked, his voice cracking. Do we just pretend this never happened and go back to our miserable lives? No, Leo said firmly, standing up with more strength than I'd seen from him in years. Now, we do what Arthur actually wanted us to do. We tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. We stop protecting people who don't deserve it. We start being the family he deserved. 6 months later, Brenda used her inheritance to establish the Arthur Miller Foundation for wrongly accused kids, providing legal aid and counseling for children blamed for things they didn't do. The foundation's first big case involved a teenage boy expelled from school due to false accusations from a jealous classmate. Brenda saw herself in both the accuser and accused, fighting harder for justice than anyone expected. Leo donated his entire trust fund to expand the foundation's reach, saying money couldn't buy back his lost relationship with Arthur, but it might prevent other families from making the same mistakes. He also started therapy and began speaking publicly about the long-term effects of childhood trauma and family scapegoating. Aunt Carol used her savings to commission a memorial garden in Arthur's honor at the local hospital where Leo had been treated. She spent retirement volunteering there, reading to kids in the ER, and pushing for better talks between staff and families in a crisis. Leo used his college money to study criminal justice and psychology, wanting to help folks falsely accused of crimes or family issues. He wrote his thesis on family scapegoating psychology and how small lies ruin relationships for generations. I kept my inheritance, but not for myself. Owen's final document was super clear on the conditions. The money meant I'd spend my life telling true stories about families who'd improved, exposing the toxic stuff that almost ruined ours. That's why I'm sharing the story now, as openly and honestly as I can. But the story isn't over. Last week, exactly a year after Owen passed, I got a certified letter from some Seattle law firm I'd never heard of, another uncle I never knew I had. Owen's half-brother, from Grandpa's first marriage, died and left exact instructions for his will to be read only if I was there. The lawyer, a stern woman in her 60s, gave me a sealed envelope with my name on it, written in a hand that looked just like Owen's. Inside was a photo of Owen and this mysterious uncle, standing and smiling in front of a building I didn't know. On the back, someone had carefully written, "Some family secrets run deeper." The real puzzle wasn't about money. It was about if your generation would pick truth over comfort when it really counted. Below that message was a Montana address and another old key. This one was brass, smooth from decades of use. The lawyer said this uncle, Arthur, had been watching our family drama from afar for years. He knew about Brenda's lie, our parents' failure to investigate, and Owen's years of isolation and pain. He also left me an inheritance, but only if I'd keep doing what Owen started. Arthur believes some family traditions are worth breaking, the lawyer said, but others are worth starting. I drove to Montana the next morning, my car packed with camping gear and supplies for a week. The address led to a remote property near Bozeman, surrounded by endless mountains. The main house was a big log cabin, looked built in the 1920s with parts added as the family grew. The brass key opened the front door easily, and I stepped into what felt like a family history museum I'd never known about. Walls were covered with photos spanning almost a century, relatives I'd never met, family gatherings before I was born, and dozens of Owen at all ages. But these weren't the formal portraits we had at home. These were candid shots. Him laughing, working on computers, talking lively with an older man who had to be Arthur. In the main room center was another table, this one carved from a single oak piece, polished to a mirror shine. On it was a leather-bound journal and a note in Arthur's handwriting. If you're reading this, it means you chose truth over comfort when it mattered most. Owen told me about your family's dynamics years ago. He also told me about you, how you were the only one who ever questioned Brenda's story. Even as a kid, he believed you had the strength to break the cycle. I opened the journal and found pages of family history no one had ever shared. Arthur had documented our family's dysfunction for decades, tracking how lies and manipulation passed down like genetic diseases. Our grandpa, remembered as a loving patriarch who told stories and took us on adventures, was actually an alcoholic who abandoned his first wife and son when Arthur was 3. He completely reinvented himself, marrying our grandma and creating a new family, pretending his past life never happened. The pattern repeated with our parents' generation. Our dad covered up a college hit and run, letting an innocent classmate take the blame and serve 2 years. Our mom stole money from her employer for our house, then rigged the accounting system to frame a coworker for the theft. Owen discovered these secrets as a teen while helping our dad with computer problems. He found hidden files with evidence of both crimes, plus docs showing how our parents systematically destroyed innocent lives to protect themselves. That's when everything about our family dynamic started making sense to me. Owen wasn't the family troublemaker because he was bad. He was asking tough questions because he learned our whole family was built on lies and betrayal. Our parents treated him like a threat. He might expose their careful facades. When Brenda lied about the warehouse, they had the perfect excuse to totally discredit him. They could just dismiss anything he said about their past as a dangerous, untrustworthy kid's ramblings. Arthur's journal had copies of legal docs proving everything: police reports, court transcripts, medical, employment files, all neat and verified. He'd spent decades building an airtight case against our parents and grandparents, waiting to expose the truth, but never acted. I was a coward, his last entry read. I had the power to clear innocent names and bring justice to my family's victims. Instead, I chose silence because facing the truth would have meant losing the only family I had left, even if it was built on lies. At the journal's bottom was a phone number and an instruction. Call this number if you're ready to finish what I should have started. I dialed the number with shaky hands. A woman answered on the first ring. Miss Thorne, I've been waiting for your call. I'm Detective Miller. I work the case your Uncle Arthur contacted us about 15 years ago. She said Arthur went to the police with his evidence after Owen's warehouse incident, hoping to explain the family dynamics that led to Brenda's lie. But the statute of limitations on both our parents' crimes had expired, making prosecution impossible. However, Detective Miller continued, the victims are still alive. The man who served time for your dad's hit and run is 63, living in Oregon. The woman fired and prosecuted for your mom's embezzlement is 58, struggling in a nursing home she can't afford. She gave me their contact info and Arthur's last request. Use Owen's foundation and my inheritance to pay back the people our family had wronged. Those talks were the hardest I'd ever had. Daniel Perez, the man who served 2 years for our dad's hit and run, cried when I called to explain what happened. He lost his scholarship, fiancé, and whole future because of a crime he didn't do. He'd spent 40 years carrying the shame of what our dad did. I always wondered why your dad was so kind to me after the trial, he said. He visited me in prison twice, brought me books, said he was praying for my rehabilitation. I thought he was just a good Christian guy trying to help a criminal find redemption. Our dad visited his victim to manage his own guilt, not from real compassion. Sarah Kim, the woman our mom framed for embezzlement, lost her accounting career and never worked in finance again. She spent her savings on legal fees to prove her innocence, then worked minimum wage jobs because no one would hire her with a record. Your mom sent me a Christmas card every year for 20 years, Sarah told me. She'd write little notes, praying for my family, hoping I found peace. I kept them, thinking someone still believed I was good. Our mom had been sending Christmas cards to the woman whose life she ruined. Using Arthur's docs and the foundation's legal team, we gave full restitution to both victims. Daniel got enough money to buy a house and secure his retirement. Sarah's criminal record was cleared, and she got compensation covering 4 decades of lost wages and pension contributions. But the hardest part was still coming. Arthur had left specific instructions for handling our parents' reactions to the news. They were both alive, Dad had early dementia, and Mom lived in assisted care after a stroke. I drove to the facility with all the evidence, knowing this talk would destroy what little family relations we had left. Mom was in her wheelchair by the window when I got there, staring blankly at the garden, her default since the stroke. Her speech was limited, but her mind was sharp enough to get what I was showing her. I spread the documents on the table, watching her face change as she recognized her handwriting on the forged records. Daniel, Sarah, she whispered. The only 2 words she said, our whole conversation. I explained how Arthur documented everything, how victims suffered for decades, and how we used Owen's foundation to provide restitution. I told her about the Christmas cards she sent Sarah, and how they were received by a woman who had no idea why her life was ruined. Mom started crying, not gentle tears, but raw, devastating sobs of someone whose whole self was crumbling. When I finished explaining, she pulled a notebook from her bedside and wrote 1 sentence with her shaky left hand. Tell them I'm sorry. I left the facility and drove straight to our dad's memory care unit. Dad was in the common room, working a jigsaw puzzle he'd been assembling and disassembling for weeks, not remembering he'd done it. When I showed him the police reports from his hit and run, something flickered in his eyes. A clear moment pierced his dementia fog. Daniel was a good kid, he said suddenly, his voice stronger than it'd been in months. He didn't deserve what happened to him. For a few minutes, my dad remembered everything. He told me about the accident night, how he'd been drunk, driving home from a party when he hit Daniel's bicycle. He panicked, drove off, then came back hours later pretending to be a witness who found the scene. I knew he was innocent, Dad said. I watched them arrest him and said nothing. I visited him in prison because I thought, if I was kind to him, it'd make it less evil. The clarity faded fast, and Dad went back to his puzzle, forgetting our talk entirely. But I got what I came for, confirmation. Arthur's evidence was accurate, and our parents knowingly ruined innocent lives. Over the next 6 months, I worked with the foundation's legal team to contact everyone our family had wronged. Arthur's journal referenced dozens of smaller incidents: co-workers fired on false claims, classmates bullied into silence, neighbors isolated for questioning our family's story. Each talk felt like soul surgery, cutting away parts of my identity built around being from a good family. But each talk also brought healing to people who'd carried undeserved shame for decades. The most surprising call came from Brenda herself. "I found something in Owen's house," she said, barely audible, "hidden in his bedroom wall. I think you need to see it." I drove to Owen's mansion, which Brenda was slowly cleaning out for her foundation work. She led me to his bedroom, where she found a hidden compartment behind his headboard. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to our family but never sent. I wrote these when I couldn't sleep over the years. One letter to me started, "I wanted you to know I saw you trying to tell the truth when you were 12. I saw how Mom silenced you, and wanted to tell you I knew you believed me, but I feared acknowledging it would put you in my same isolated, blamed position." Letters to Alex were full of medical advice and emotional support Owen had researched but never shared. "I've been following your physical therapy progress through Mom's Facebook posts," one read. "I found some experimental treatments that might help your chronic pain, but didn't know how to contact you without more family drama." The most devastating letters were the ones to our parents. "I forgive you for choosing to believe Brenda's lie," he'd written to Mom. "I get that admitting you were wrong would mean facing your poor judgment, but you believing I was dangerous made me grow up thinking I actually was. I spent 15 years afraid of my own violence, because people who should have known me best said I could hurt kids." To Dad, "I know about the hidden run and Mom's embezzlement. Uncle Arthur told me everything when I turned 18. I've spent my adult life wondering if I inherited your ability to destroy innocent lives, or if I could choose to be different. I chose different, but that cost me my family." The last letter, dated a week before he died, was for all of us. "I'm dying from a heart condition that might have been treated if I'd had family encouraging me to get medical care sooner. But I was so used to being the family problem that I ignored my symptoms until it was too late. I don't blame you for my death, but know that isolation kills people just like any disease. I set up the riddle and warehouse revelation not to punish you, but to give you a chance to choose truth over comfort. If you're reading this, it means you made the right choice. It means our family's next generation might actually have a chance to be healthy. The foundation isn't about my legacy. It's about giving other falsely accused kids the support system I never had. It's about breaking the cycle of lies and manipulation that defined our family for 4 generations. Arthur has more info on our family history. He was too afraid to share it alive, but left everything to you, my dear niece, believing you have the strength to handle the truth. Some stories are meant to end. Others are meant to change into something better. I love you all, even though I couldn't figure out how to stay connected with you while keeping my integrity. Choose better for your kids." Brenda and I cried together in Owen's empty bedroom, mourning his death and the relationship we could have had if our family chose truth over convenience decades ago. 2 weeks later, Arthur's lawyer contacted me about a final request. Arthur bought property in Montana to set up a retreat center for families dealing with false accusations, scapegoating, and generational trauma. The buildings were already built. They just needed staff and programs. He wanted it called the Owen Thorne Center for Family Truth, the lawyer explained. He hoped you'd consider running it. I moved to Montana 6 months ago. The center officially opened in January, offering week-long programs for families ready to face their own patterns of dysfunction and deception. We offer therapy, mediation, and legal advocacy for people trying to clear their names or fix relationships damaged by false accusations. Brenda visits every few months, bringing updates on the foundation's work and progress reports on the families we've helped. Alex finished his psychology degree and joined our staff as a trauma counselor. Leo transferred to the University of Montana and helps with our legal advocacy program. Mom died peacefully in her sleep last winter. Her last words to the nursing staff were, "Tell Daniel and Sarah, I'm sorry." We held a small memorial and donated her remaining savings to the foundation. Dad's dementia has progressed. He no longer recognizes us. But staff say he often talks about a boy named Daniel and asks if he's okay. The latest came last month when Detective Miller called with shocking news. "We've had a breakthrough in the Sarah Kim case," she said. "Your mom's former employer has agreed to issue a public apology and provide more compensation. Apparently, your foundation's work inspired other companies to review old files for wrongly terminated employees." She paused. "There's more. We found 17 other cases from that time where the real culprit was protected, while innocent employees were blamed. Your family's pattern of framing others wasn't unique. It was part of a wider culture of corruption at that company. Sarah Kim, now 71, is a volunteer advocate for our center. She helps other seniors trying to clear their names after decades of undeserved shame. Daniel Perez, now 65, used his restitution money to set up a scholarship fund for formerly incarcerated people trying to rebuild their lives. He calls it the Second Chance Foundation, and he visits our center yearly to talk with families about false accusations' long-term effects. The hardest part wasn't prison, he tells our guests. It was the 40 years after, always wondering if folks could see my criminal record when they looked at me, always feeling I had to work twice as hard to prove I deserved basic human dignity. Both Daniel and Sarah said learning the truth about what happened to them, even decades later, was more healing than any therapy or compensation. Last week, I got another mysterious envelope, hand-delivered to the center's front desk. Inside was a photo of a young girl I didn't know, standing in front of a familiar house I couldn't quite place. On the back was written, "Owen had a daughter. Her name is Chloe. She's 20 now and she's been waiting her whole life to meet her family. Chloe's been waiting for someone to tell her the truth about her dad not calling." Under that was a Portland address and a phone number. "I'm driving to Portland tomorrow. Some family stories don't really end. They just show new chapters when you're ready for the truth." Chloe answered on the first ring, like she'd waited for years. "Is this about my dad?" she asked before I introduced myself. "Yeah," Liam said. "I'm your cousin, and I've got a lot to tell you. The secrets stop with my generation.